Hollywood's golden age is remembered as an era of glamour, sweeping romances, larger-than-life heroes, and stars whose faces defined a century of cinema. But behind the studio lighting and the carefully managed press narratives, the era also produced some of the entertainment industry's darkest, best-documented scandals. This is not a story about rumors or gossip. It's a look at 6 of the most famous names from that period and the real, historically recorded controversies that followed them. Some resolved in courtrooms, some confirmed decades later by family members and biographers, and some captured in the star's own words. Errol Flynn was born in 1909 in Hobart, Tasmania, and became one of the biggest stars in the world after his breakout role in Captain Blood in 1935. Warner Brothers billed him into the definitive swashbuckling leading man of the era, dashing, athletic, and seemingly untouchable. That image collided with reality in 1942, when Flynn was charged with statutory rape involving 2 teenage girls, Betty Hansen and Peggy Satterley. The trial became a national sensation, covered obsessively by newspapers across the country. Flynn's defense team mounted an aggressive case, and after a widely publicized trial, he was acquitted on all counts in early 1943. The acquittal did little to settle the matter in the public imagination. The phrase, unlike Flynn, entered American slang in the trial's aftermath, a grim testament to how thoroughly the case became part of his public identity. Treated by much of the culture as scandalous entertainment rather than a serious allegation involving minors. Biographers who examined Flynn's life afterward, including Charles Hyam in his controversial 1980 biography, painted a portrait of a man whose off-screen life was defined by heavy drinking, drug use, and a pattern of relationships with much younger women that continued for the rest of his life. Most notably his final relationship with Beverly Odland, which began when she was 15 years old. Flynn's health deteriorated rapidly through the 1950s. He died in Vancouver in October 1959 at the age of 50. His autopsy cited a combination of a heart attack, liver damage, and other conditions consistent with decades of heavy drinking. What's left of his legacy is a genuinely complicated one. A gifted, charismatic performer whose fame, by most historical accounts, shielded him from serious consequences for behavior that would almost certainly end a career today. Kirk Douglas, born as Sir Danilovich in 1916 to Belarusian Jewish immigrants, built one of the most respected careers in Hollywood history, from Spartacus to Paths of Glory to his decades-long friendship and creative partnership with Burt Lancaster. He was, by nearly every account, one of the industry's hardest workers and most demanding perfectionists, a trait that made him beloved by some collaborators and difficult for others. The most serious allegation connected to Douglas's name did not surface publicly until decades later. In her 2018 memoir Little Sister, My Investigation into the Mysterious Death of Natalie Wood, Lana Wood, Natalie Wood's younger sister, wrote that Natalie had told her, as a teenager, that she had been sexually assaulted by a much older, very famous actor at the beginning of her career, and that family members and biographers who examined the claim over the years connected the account to Douglas based on details Natalie was said to have shared with those close to her. Douglas, who died in 2020 at the age of 103, never faced any legal proceedings related to claim, and he denied any wrongdoing during his lifetime when earlier versions of the rumors circulated. The allegation remains unproven in any legal sense. It exists in the historical record because of what Wood's family and biographers have said publicly, not because of any court finding. What is well documented, separate from that claim, is Douglas's on-set reputation. Numerous directors, co-stars, and crew members over his 7-decade career described him as intensely controlling and prone to explosive anger when productions didn't meet his standards, a reputation that shaped how Hollywood talked about him long before Lana Wood's book was published. Faye Dunaway, born in Bascom, Florida in 1941, became one of the defining actresses of the new Hollywood era with Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, and Chinatown, 1974, and won an Academy Award for Network, 1976. Her talent was never in question. Her behavior on set became, over time, one of the most talked-about aspects of her career. The most infamous chapter is her role as Joan Crawford in Mommy Dearest, 1981, a film already built around depicting an abusive parent. Director Frank Perry and multiple crew members later described the production as chaotic, with reported clashes over Dunaway's demands and behavior contributing to a shoot widely regarded, fairly or not, as one of the more difficult in the studio era's aftermath. The film itself became a cult classic largely mocked for its excess, which only fed the narrative around Dunaway. Reports of difficult, sometimes explosive behavior toward crew members followed her across subsequent decades and multiple productions, cited by various directors, producers, and co-stars in interviews over the years as a reason she became harder to cast in later stages of her career. In 2011, Dunaway was dismissed from a Broadway revival of Tea at 5 amid public reports of conflict with the production. She disputed the characterization of events at the time. As recently as 2020, further allegations of abusive on-set conduct connected to the film phase surfaced in entertainment press coverage. Dunaway has periodically pushed back publicly against her reputation, attributing much of it to a double standard applied to demanding women in an industry that tolerated and often rewarded the same behavior from men. Few stars were as tightly bound to a national self-image as John Wayne. Born Marion Morrison in Winterset, Iowa, in 1907, he became the defining face of the American Western and, for many, a symbol of a certain vision of American identity itself. Unlike the other cases here, the most damaging material connected to Wayne isn't an allegation. It's his own recorded words. In a 1971 interview with Playboy magazine, Wayne made a series of statements that are now widely cited as evidence of open racism, including comments dismissive of Native American land claims and statements suggesting Black Americans were not yet ready for full civic responsibility. Comments he made in his own voice on the record and never publicly retracted. The interview has been reprinted and analyzed extensively in the decades since, and remains one of the most cited primary documents when historians and critics discuss the uncomfortable gap between Wayne's screen persona and his personal views. On set, Wayne was widely described by collaborators as commanding and, at times, intimidating, a larger-than-life presence who expected total deference. His clashes with director John Ford, particularly during the making of The Searchers, 1956, are well documented. The film itself is now frequently studied precisely because of the tension between its complicated, morally compromised protagonist and Wayne's own convictions about how the character should be portrayed. Wayne died of stomach cancer in 1979 at age 72, still one of the most popular actors in American history, a popularity that has coexisted awkwardly with a historical record of what he actually said. Of every name connected to Hollywood's darker history, Roman Polanski's case is the most legally unambiguous. Polanski, born in Paris in 1933 to Polish parents and a survivor of the Krakow ghetto during the Holocaust, became one of cinema's most acclaimed directors with films like Rosemary's Baby, 1968, and Chinatown, 1974. The latter made not long after the brutal 1969 murder of his wife, Sharon Tate, by the Manson family. In March 1977, Polanski was arrested for drugging and sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl, Samantha Geimer, during a photography session at Jack Nicholson's Los Angeles home. He was indicted on 6 criminal counts. As part of a plea agreement, Polanski pleaded guilty to 1 count of unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. Before his sentencing could take place, in 1978, fearing the judge would disregard the plea deal, Polanski fled the United States for France, where citizenship protected him from extradition. He has not returned to the U.S. since. Polanski continued his filmmaking career from Europe for the following decades, winning the Academy Award for Best Director in 2003 for The Pianist, an award he could not accept in person. The moment remains one of the most discussed in Oscars history, drawing a standing ovation from much of the audience, even as many in and outside the industry criticized the decision to honor him. Geimer herself has, in later years, publicly stated that she has forgiven Polanski and wished the case would be resolved so both could move on, a position that has complicated but not resolved the broader debate about how the industry should treat his work. In 2018, Polanski was expelled from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. In 2020, his film An Officer and a Spy won multiple César Awards in France despite protests, and several prominent French actresses walked out of the ceremony in objection. A moment widely covered as a symbol of the industry's continued struggle to reconcile artistic acclaim with the underlying facts of the case. Mickey Rooney, born Joseph Hill Jr. in 1920, was one of the first true child stars of American cinema and, for a stretch in the late 1930s, the single biggest box office draw in the country through MGM's Andy Hardy films. His public image was built entirely on wholesome charm. His private life told a different story. Rooney was married 8 times, and several of those marriages ended amid public reports of infidelity and financial chaos. He also struggled for years with gambling debts that repeatedly derailed his finances despite his enormous early earnings. His relationship with Judy Garland, his close friend and frequent co-star during their years together at MGM, has been the subject of extensive biographical work examining how the studio system's punishing schedules and pressures affected both of them. Garland's own struggles with substance dependency, well documented by multiple biographers, began under a studio regime that treated its young stars, including Rooney, as commercial property. The most serious and well-documented controversy of Rooney's later life came not from his own conduct, but from what happened to him. In 2011, in his late 80s, Rooney testified before the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging about elder abuse, describing how he had been financially and emotionally exploited by family members who controlled his affairs. The testimony led to significant legal proceedings and drew national attention to elder financial abuse as an issue. Rooney died in 2014 at age 93. Reports at the time indicated his estate was left with very limited assets, a stark contrast to the fortune he had earned across an 8-decade career. Taken together, these 6 stories don't reduce neatly to a single lesson, and they aren't equivalent to one another. A criminal conviction, a documented on-the-record interview, family accounts published decades after the fact, and a reputation for being difficult on set are not the same kind of evidence, and treating them as interchangeable does a disservice to the truth in each case. What connects them is something more specific to how the studio system functioned. Enormous commercial incentives to protect a star's image, a press ecosystem that was often complicit in managing scandal rather than exposing it, and decades in which victims, particularly women and particularly minors, had far less power to be believed or protected than the stars accused of harming them. That system has changed, unevenly and incompletely, in the decades since. Some of these cases were resolved in courts of law. Others were only fully acknowledged by family members, biographers, or the public long after people involved had died or left the country. And in at least one case, John Wayne's, the most damning evidence isn't an allegation at all, but a recorded interview in the star's own words, sitting in plain sight since 1971. Hollywood's golden age produced genuine artistic achievements that remain worth studying and, in many cases, worth admiring. It also produced a system that too often protected powerful men and women from the consequences of serious harm. Both things are part of the historical record, and neither cancels out the other. Understanding the era honestly means holding both at once, not flattening 6 very different stories into a single, tidy narrative of villainy, but reckoning with what actually happened to the extent it can be documented, and asking why it took as long as it did for so much of it to be said openly.